She thought it was only a new fragrance, until one spritz at lunch left a villager dead before dessert. This is Agatha Raisin and the perfume that killed at noon. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? Your comments make this cozy corner feel even warmer, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next mystery. The morning began with drizzle, the Cotswold kind that behaved like gossip, light, persistent, and impossible to ignore. From her cottage window in Carsely, Agatha Raisin watched it fall upon the village green, turning the cobbles slick and the ducks smug. Somewhere across the lane a kettle whistled. Somewhere else, Hodge yawned like a creature who found mornings overrated. Agatha stubbed out her cigarette, muttering, "If the good Lord meant us to start early, he'd have given us better complexions." Today was the Women's Institute's Scent and Sensibility workshop, and she refused, absolutely refused, to be shown up by the locals' awful taste in lavender. She had dressed for battle, silk scarf, leopard print naturally, crisp trench coat, and her best perfume, a French number she was certain cost a week's pension. She spritzed once more, ignoring Hodge's sneeze, and strode out into the drizzle with her chin high and heart set on triumph. The vicarage hall smelled of damp coats, sponge cake, and optimism. Rows of folding chairs surrounded a trestle table covered in glass vials and tiny spoons. At its centre stood Delilah Trent, tall, blonde, and glossy as a magazine advert. Her perfume, some delicate cloud of flowers and ambition, seemed to silence the chatter. "Ladies," Delilah trilled, flashing teeth too white for Gloucestershire, "today we'll each create our own signature scent, an expression of our soul." Agatha caught Mrs. Bloxby's serene smile and suppressed a snort. The vicar's wife could make even a sermon about compost sound encouraging. Doris Simpson, Agatha's cleaning lady, was already whispering to Mrs. Jessup about Delilah's London ways. When Agatha's turn came to describe her fragrance personality, she cleared her throat. "Confident, modern, sophisticated. I've always preferred something Parisian." "Lovely," Delilah said sweetly. She sniffed the air near Agatha's wrist. "Oh, that's rather familiar. Bouquet Elegance, isn't it? Tesco had a special last year." The hall erupted. Giggles from the back row. Mrs. Jessup nearly choked on her Battenberg. Agatha felt the blood rush to her cheeks. "It was not Tesco," she said coldly. "It's French." "Yes," said Delilah, smiling. "Frenchish." The rest of the session passed in a blur of humiliation and scented chaos. One woman's concoction smelled of disinfectant, another's like boiled cabbage. Agatha, grimly determined to outshine them all, mixed hers with trembling precision. The result was sharp, floral, and slightly alarming, rather like herself. During tea break, Roy Silver rang from London. "Darling, I hear you're dabbling in chemistry. Be careful, you might invent eau de raisin." Agatha hung up before he could laugh further. By noon, Delilah had begun her grand demonstration. She held up a cut-glass atomizer. "My signature creation," she announced. "Noon bloom, the scent of sunlight itself." She spritzed the air dramatically. For a moment it was lovely, jasmine and honey and something bright. Then her voice faltered. Her hand wavered. "Delilah?" Mrs. Bloxby called gently. Delilah blinked, swayed, and collapsed in a graceful heap beside the trestle table. Gasps echoed. Someone dropped a teacup. Agatha, nearest to her, bent down, her scarf brushing the floor. "Honestly," she murmured, checking the pulse, "some people will do anything for attention." But Delilah lay frighteningly still, her perfume bottle rolling across the tiles, spilling a single glistening drop that mingled with the drizzle blowing in from the open door. And for the first time that morning, Agatha Raisin's self-assurance faltered, just enough to let in the scent of real trouble. Carsely had not seen such excitement since the vicar's wife's Christmas pudding caught fire. By the next morning, Delilah Trent's fainting fit had become legend. Over tea and scones, the villagers debated whether it had been heatstroke, hunger, or a desperate plea for attention. Agatha, reading the Evesham Echo, found none of those explanations satisfactory. She lit a cigarette, ignoring Hodge's disdainful flick of the tail. "Low blood sugar, my foot," she muttered. "Women like that live on compliments, not calories." At the vicarage, Mrs. Bloxby offered her the kind of gentle rebuke only saints and vicars' wives can manage. "Perhaps Delilah is under strain, Mrs. Raisin. Moving to a new village can be difficult. Strain doesn't make you faint into your own perfume, Agatha retorted, unless it's poisonous, which, come to think of it, it might be. Mrs. Bloxby poured tea. Do try not to start another feud. We're still recovering from the great quiche scandal. Agatha sniffed. That was entirely different. Those were pastries. Later that morning, Bill Wong appeared at her cottage, his expression caught between patience and foreboding. Collecting the raffle funds for the WI, Agatha. Don't tell me you've already frightened half the committee. Nonsense. I merely pointed out that Delilah's story doesn't add up. She says she opened that shop in Mercester on savings, but she hasn't worked in years. Bill sighed. Just let the police handle anything suspicious, all right? The police, Agatha said darkly, wouldn't notice a clue if it danced in a tutu across the village green. He gave her a tolerant smile. Leave your tutu at home, then. After he left, Agatha decided that leaving things alone was a phrase invented by dull people. Curiosity prodded her toward her little Fiat, and before lunch she was in Mercester, peering through the scented fog of Delilah's perfume parlour. Inside, glass shelves glinted under soft lighting. Bottles with gilt labels whispered luxury, though the flooring screamed discount warehouse. The assistant, a timid girl named Pippa, looked terrified at the sight of Agatha's purposeful expression. I'm, just browsing, Agatha said, examining a display of atomizers. Is Miss Trent about? She's resting at home, poor thing, Pippa said. Doctor's orders. Agatha leaned closer. Terrible business. Fainting like that in public, and such stress running a shop alone. Oh, she's not alone, Pippa said, then bit her lip. I mean, she has her silent partner, of course. Silent partner? Pippa's blush deepened. Mr. Lacey, I think. Or maybe Larry. She always called him E. Agatha filed that away with satisfaction. Thank you, dear. You've been most helpful. And could you wrap this bottle for me? She pointed to one labelled Noon Bloom. Outside, the drizzle had turned to proper rain. Agatha fumbled for her umbrella just as the purr of an engine drew her gaze. Charles Frayth's vintage convertible rolled to the curb, absurdly elegant under a tartan umbrella he wasn't using. Agatha, he called, you look like a spy in a puddle. And you look like an idiot without a hat, he grinned, stepping out. I hear our fragrant friend gave quite the performance yesterday. Thought I'd check whether you'd killed her yourself. Not yet, said Agatha, but someone will, if she keeps fluttering those lashes at every man within range. Including me? Charles asked lightly. Agatha sniffed. You're immune. You'd flirt with a mirror if it winked first. They ducked into a nearby tea shop, dripping and bickering. Charles ordered coffee, Agatha tea strong enough to wake the dead. He leaned back, perfectly relaxed. You know, Delilah's rather impressive. Started her own business. Makes women feel glamorous. You could take notes. Notes? Agatha bristled. I could sell more perfume in a day than she could in a lifetime, if I wanted to. Of course, said Charles mildly, stirring his cup. But then you'd have to be nice to people. Agatha would have retorted, but just then her mobile, a relic from the last century, buzzed. It was Mrs. Bloxby, her voice hesitant. Agatha, dear, I'm afraid there's been an incident. Mrs. Jessup's spaniel collapsed this afternoon, right after it sniffed that little perfume bottle Delilah left behind. Agatha froze. Is the dog all right? The vet says it will recover, but everyone's rather unsettled. Charles raised an eyebrow. Perhaps you found your poison after all. Don't be absurd, said Agatha automatically, though her pulse quickened. Dogs have delicate noses. So do women with enemies, he replied. As she drove home through the rain, Agatha's mind ticked over. Delilah's mysterious partner, the missing bottle, the fainting fit, all too neat, too theatrical. Perhaps she wasn't just vain and vapid. Perhaps she was dangerous. Back in her cottage, Hodge awaited supper and scolded her with a disdainful meow. She poured herself a gin instead. Don't look at me like that, she told the cat. Someone in this village smells wrong, and I mean to find out who. Hodge blinked, unimpressed, before curling up on her newspaper. Outside, the drizzle resumed, soft, persistent, and filled with secrets. Agatha lit a cigarette and watched the smoke curl toward the ceiling. Low blood sugar, she said aloud, more like high drama. And somewhere in the damp Cotswold air, she could almost catch the faintest whiff of trouble. The Red Lion smelled of roast beef, damp wool and unspoken gossip. In other words, perfectly Carsely. Agatha Raisin sat at her usual corner table, pretending to read the menu, but really keeping one eye on the door. She'd invited Delilah Trent to lunch, ostensibly to mend fences, but in truth to probe. Her plan had 3 parts: charm, corner, and conquer. Unfortunately, Charles Fraith ruined all 3 by sauntering in 10 minutes early, removing his gloves as if stepping into a private club. "Couldn't resist," he said cheerfully. "Word reached me that you were hosting the village's new goddess of scent." Agatha glared. "You're not invited." "You never invite me," he said, sliding into the chair opposite. "I take it as a standing omission." Before she could argue, Delilah arrived, the kind of entrance that made curtains seem theatrical. Her perfume preceded her, light and sugary, and she wore a cream suit entirely unsuited to the weather. The pub's regulars, normally unmoved by royalty, turned as one. "Agatha, darling," Delilah trilled, "how sweet of you to ask me." "Pleasure," said Agatha, meaning the opposite. "This is Charles Fraith. He lives nearby. Don't encourage him." Charles rose gallantly, taking Delilah's hand. "A delight. I do admire entrepreneurship. I'm told your shop is the talk of Mercester." Delilah blushed prettily. "I do what I can. I've had a few famous clients, you know, a television presenter, an MP's wife. They all adore Noon Bloom." Agatha's mouth twitched. "Do they faint after using it, or is that just for the Cotswolds market?" Delilah laughed. "Too high, too brittle. Low blood sugar, that's all. I was mortified. Such a silly thing." "Quite," said Agatha, watching her stir sugar into her tea. The woman's hand trembled, just slightly. Her fingers bore faint stains, almost yellow. A chemist might have recognized them. Agatha merely filed it away as suspicious. Lunch began innocently enough. Roast chicken, Yorkshire pudding, and the hum of gossip drifting from nearby tables. Mrs. Jessup and Doris Simpson were both present, pretending not to eavesdrop. Every time Delilah laughed, their heads swiveled like pigeons. "Your perfume line must be terribly lucrative," Agatha said, carving her chicken with surgical precision. "Oh, I manage," Delilah replied. "I've had wonderful support from, well, friends in the trade." "Ah, silent partners," said Charles lazily. "The best kind. They never talk back." Delilah's fork froze briefly. "Quite." She dabbed her lips. "Excuse me a moment. I must take this call." Her handbag trilled a dated ringtone. She rose, smiling apologetically, and stepped outside into the narrow lane. Agatha watched her go, lighting a cigarette despite the sign forbidding it. "Low blood sugar," she muttered. "High drama, more like." "She's charming," said Charles. "She's hiding something." "Probably her age. They usually do." Agatha ignored him, gazing through the window at Delilah's silhouette, the phone pressed to her ear. The woman's back was rigid, her gestures sharp. When she returned, her smile had the brittle glaze of panic. "All sorted," she said lightly. "A supplier issue. Nothing dreadful." Agatha didn't believe a word. The grandfather clock above the bar struck noon, each chime echoing through the pub. Delilah lifted her teacup, her hand shaking just once more. She managed to laugh at something Charles said, something silly about bottling Cotswold mud. And then her face changed. Her eyes widened. The cup slipped. She slumped forward, scattering scones and jam across the tablecloth. The sound was shockingly ordinary. A thud, a gasp, the scrape of a chair. Agatha half rose, frozen, then reached instinctively to shake her. The movement sent jam smearing across her sleeve like blood. "Delilah?" No answer. Her skin was already cooling. Someone screamed. The landlord shouted for an ambulance. Agatha stood rooted, the cigarette still between her fingers, the smoke curling absurdly upward. Charles leaned over, checking for a pulse. His expression tightened. "She's gone," he said quietly. The room erupted in noise, chairs scraping, cutlery clattering, voices rising. Agatha's mind spun uselessly, snatching at details. The tremor, the stains, the phone call. A faint, sweet scent lingered. Not flowers, something chemical beneath. Bill Wong arrived with the paramedics, looking grim. He spotted Agatha immediately. "Oh no," he said under his breath, "not again." "I didn't do anything," she protested. "She just collapsed." Bill's tone was weary. "At your table, in front of half the village. You do have timing, Agatha." "It was her perfume," she insisted. "I told you there was something wrong with it," Charles murmured. "You also told me she was faking." Oh, shut up. They led Agatha aside, asking questions she could barely answer. The world smelled suddenly of antiseptic and fear. Outside, the drizzle had begun again, soft and relentless. By the time Delilah's body was taken away, the pub had fallen silent, as if gossip itself were holding its breath. Bill touched Agatha's arm gently. "We'll need your statement. Try not to embellish." "Meaning?" "Meaning tell the truth the first time," he said, not unkindly. At home that evening, Hodge prowled around her ankles, indignant at the late supper. Agatha poured herself a gin, hands still trembling. She thought of Delilah's laughter, the trembling spoon, the sudden chill of her skin. Somewhere between vanity and danger the woman had crossed an invisible line, and Agatha, draped in jam and guilt, had been right beside her. She sighed, lighting another cigarette. "I only wanted lunch," she said aloud. "Now I'll have the police on my doorstep and the WI on my back." Hodge mewed reproachfully, curling into his chair. "Don't look at me like that," Agatha muttered. "Next time I'm eating at home." But she didn't believe it. Not for a second. The Red Lion had never looked so self-conscious. Normally it smelled of beer, carpet shampoo and comfort. Now it reeked of fear and disinfectant. The lunch crowd had vanished, replaced by police tape, clipboard-wielding officers, and one deeply offended landlord. Agatha Raisin sat at a corner table, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her sleeve still bore a sticky patch of jam, an absurd souvenir from Delilah Trent's final moments. Across from her, Bill Wong was making notes with grim efficiency. "You realize," Agatha said, voice low, "this is going to ruin their lunch trade for weeks." "You realize," Bill replied mildly, "you're a witness in a suspicious death." "So you do think it's murder?" "We don't think anything yet." "Well, I do," Bill sighed. "Agatha, don't Agatha me in that patient tone," she snapped. "You're the police. I'm the one who's actually seen things." Her hand was shaking. There was a smell. Almonds. "I know that means cyanide." "Or marzipan from dessert," he said dryly. She glared. "It wasn't marzipan. I'd have eaten it." Before he could answer, the pub door banged open. A large man in a beige overcoat strode in, trailing the authority of Mercester CID. Inspector Wilkes was famous for three things: impatience, dandruff, and his loathing of interfering women. He had once called Agatha a civilian nuisance with lipstick. "Mrs. Raisin," he barked, as if summoning a suspect rather than a witness. "Sit tight." "I'm already sitting," she said. He ignored her. "We'll be interviewing everyone who was here. No one leaves until statements are complete. Understood?" "Perfectly," she said sweetly. "I only hope you've brought enough notebooks. This village thrives on talking." The inspector's pen froze mid-scribble. Bill wisely stepped between them. "Why don't I take Mrs. Raisin's statement?" Wilkes grunted, already turning away. Agatha leaned closer to Bill and whispered, "He's got dandruff on his collar. No one should be allowed to investigate a murder looking like a scone." "Agatha," Bill said again, with weary affection. After her statement, Agatha was invited to wait in the bar. She was, of course, the only one still there an hour later. The police had sealed off Delilah's table. The teacup gleamed under harsh light. From her seat, Agatha could just see the faint residue of lipstick on the rim, and, yes, a glint of something sticky on the spoon. She stood, edging closer until a constable looked up. "Just checking the upholstery," she said airily. "Please sit down, madam." "Of course." She didn't. Bending slightly, she caught a delicate scent, faint but unmistakable. Floral, yes, but with something sharp beneath. It pricked her nose, like vinegar over roses. Almond, perhaps, or poison pretending to be perfume. The constable coughed meaningfully. All right," she muttered, retreating. "I was only being observant. You should try it sometime." As she reached the door, Doris Simpson bustled in, flushed from excitement, and having clearly escaped the cleaning rota for the day. "Oh, Mrs. Raisin, have you heard? My cousin's neighbour saw a posh gent in a Jaguar arguing with that Delilah woman this morning. Said he was waving his arms and shouting about money." "A Jaguar?" Agatha perked up. "Not many of those round here. Who was he?" "Didn't say, but he had a tan, one of those suspicious tans that don't come from gardening." Doris leaned closer. "And a ring on his little finger. You know what that means." "Usually bad taste," Agatha said. "Or foreign," Doris whispered, as if confessing sin. Agatha thanked her gravely and hurried home before Bill could return and confiscate her curiosity. The drizzle had resumed, slicking the pavements and softening the air into something mournful. Inside her cottage, Hodge sat on the windowsill, tail twitching, unimpressed by death or detectives. "Don't look at me like that," she said, kicking off her shoes. "You'd be curious too. Someone murdered that woman, or frightened her to death, which amounts to the same thing." She poured a gin, the measure generous. The image of Delilah's trembling hands replayed in her mind, the stained fingers, the faint smell, and now a Jaguar driving mystery man with a temper. Her phone rang, Bill's voice weary again. "Wilkes says don't get involved." "I'm not involved," she lied. "Good, stay that way." "I merely asked Doris a question." "Agatha, Doris would confess the Crusades to you if you gave her a cup of tea. Promise me you'll behave. You sound like my dentist." "Promise." "Fine," she said, and hung up before he could gloat. The next morning, she strolled into the Red Lion under the pretext of moral support for the staff. The landlord, polishing glasses as if they'd wronged him personally, eyed her with suspicion. "We're closed, Mrs. Raisin. For once the law's on my side." "I only need a quick word." "With who? The ghosts?" Ignoring him, she scanned the bar. The teacup had been removed, but the faint pattern of its base lingered on the polished wood. She bent, sniffed discreetly, and nearly sneezed. The scent was still there. "That woman's handbag," she said suddenly. "Where is it?" "No idea," grumbled the landlord. "Police took everything. Funny thing, though, couldn't find the bag at first. Vanished before they even arrived." Agatha's mind clicked like a well-tuned lock. The missing handbag, the strange smell, the argument with the man in the Jaguar. "Thank you," she said briskly. "For what?" "For confirming my suspicions." "About what?" "Everything," she said, and swept out before he could protest. Outside, the drizzle thickened to steady rain. Agatha drew up her collar, feeling both invigorated and guilty. Bill would call her reckless. Mrs. Bloxby would call her concerned. Charles would call her nosy. They were all right. At home, she scribbled notes on the back of an old WI flyer. Tremor, almond smell, cyanide, or something cleverer. Missing handbag, idle theft, E. From Mercester shop, Jaguar man. She stared at the list, tapping her pen against her chin. Somewhere in that muddle lay a pattern, if she could only stop admiring herself for making it. "Detective by instinct," she muttered. "It's not arrogance if you're right." Hodge stretched luxuriously, unimpressed. "Fine," she told him, lighting a cigarette. "You don't care, but if the police can't manage it, I will, before they decide this is somehow my fault." Smoke curled lazily toward the ceiling. Outside, the rain beat its quiet rhythm against the window, and as Agatha watched the grey afternoon settle over Carsely, she felt the old, inconvenient thrill of a mystery, sharp as perfume and twice as dangerous. The morning began with the sound of the postman swearing. Agatha, who had been halfway through her first cigarette and second cup of coffee, opened the cottage door to find him cursing over a large, perfume-scented parcel. "Delivery for you, Mrs. Raisin," he said, rubbing his eyes. "Smells like a tart's handbag." "That'll be from London," said Agatha grimly. Inside the parcel lay a glossy magazine, a note written on pink stationery, and a spray bottle labelled Eau de Danger. The note read, "Darling, heard about your latest scandal. Don't waste it, milk it, on my way. XX Roy." Agatha groaned. Roy Silver, her old PR protégé turned occasional friend, was about to descend on Carsely. The village was not ready. By midday, a silver convertible with London plates screeched to a halt outside her gate. Out stepped Roy in designer sunglasses, scarf fluttering, exuding drama like exhaust fumes. "Agatha, sweetie," he cried, arms outstretched. "You've done it again. Death, glamour, gossip. You're irresistible." "Get in before the neighbours see," she hissed, dragging him inside. "But they should see," he protested. "It'll add authenticity when I pitch your story. From PR queen to murder magnet. I can see the headline now. Over my dead body." "Oh, darling," Roy said cheerfully. "That can be arranged." He flung himself onto her sofa, narrowly missing Hodge, who leapt off with an indignant yowl. "Good heavens, you still have the cat. How very rural." "Hodge," Agatha said pointedly, "has better manners than you." "Debatable. Now tell me everything. Was there blood? Drama? Any handsome suspects? Agatha poured a gin, resigned. It was poison, in perfume, and one handsome suspect if you count the man in the Jaguar. Roy's eyes sparkled. Perfect. A love triangle. The sultry victim, the mysterious man, and you, the no-nonsense sleuth with fabulous legs. Roy, she said warningly. Fine. Reasonably fabulous legs. By the time she'd finished recounting the events, Roy had declared himself her media manager and was already drafting imaginary interview quotes. When I smelled danger, I knew it wasn't Chanel, he read aloud. Agatha snatched the paper away. We're going to Mercester, the perfume shop. You can carry my handbag if you insist on being useful. Darling, I'm more of a moral support figure. Think of me as sparkle with substance. The drive to Mercester was accompanied by Roy's steady commentary on Cotswold life. So charming, so brown. Do people actually live here by choice? Yes, said Agatha, to avoid people like you. When they reached Delilah's perfume parlour, the door was locked but not properly closed. Agatha pushed it open, ignoring Roy's stage whisper of breaking and entering. How delicious. Inside, the air was thick with fragrance and dust. Rows of glass bottles gleamed under soft lighting. On the counter sat an open ledger, several invoices and a scattering of half-empty vials. Smells like an explosion in a flower shop, Roy said, waving a hand. Stop sniffing things, Agatha warned. He didn't. Within seconds, he dabbed a sample on his wrist. Oh, that's rather nice. He sniffed again and sneezed violently. Good Lord, it burns. You idiot, Agatha muttered. You'll kill yourself before the murderer gets a chance. She began sorting through the papers. Several invoices mentioned rare jasmine oil and sandalwood resin. Expensive imports. But one note caught her attention. Payment due or exposure imminent. E. E, she murmured. The same initial the assistant mentioned. Roy peered over her shoulder. Exposure imminent. How delightfully scandalous. Maybe she was selling fake perfume. Half the stuff in London is bootleg anyway. You think she was blackmailed? Darling, everyone in business is blackmailed. It's practically a tax. Agatha ignored him, moving to the back office. There she found a small safe, half open. Inside were 2 perfume bottles, both labelled Noon Bloom, and a row of small sample vials. One slot, however, was empty. One's missing, she said. Roy leaned in. Maybe she sold it. No, said Agatha slowly. She used it. That's the scent she wore at lunch, the one that killed her. For a rare moment, Roy was speechless. Then, fabulous. Terrifying, but fabulous. The shop bell tinkled. Both froze. A young woman entered. The timid assistant, Pippa. She stopped short, eyes wide. Mrs. Raisin, you're not supposed to— Relax, said Agatha briskly. We're helping the police. Are you? Pippa whispered. They were here yesterday, asking questions, but they didn't find the letter. Agatha handed it to her. This one? The girl nodded miserably. She was terrified, Mrs. Raisin. Said someone from her old life wanted money. Said she'd die before paying him another penny. I told her to tell the police, but she said no one would believe her. Who was E? Pippa hesitated. I don't know his full name, just Mr. E. He came to the shop once, older, well-dressed. He drove a silver Jaguar. Roy and Agatha exchanged a glance. Thank you, dear, said Agatha. You've been very helpful. As Pippa left, Roy exhaled dramatically. So our Jaguar man is real. You do attract glamour, darling. If you call death glamorous. In your case, yes. You're glowing. That's rage, said Agatha. They locked up the shop and stepped into the grey afternoon. The drizzle had returned, turning the cobbles slick. Agatha paused, gazing at the rows of elegant bottles through the window. You know, she said thoughtfully, people wear perfume to make themselves unforgettable. Delilah succeeded rather too well. That's going in the article, Roy said. There is no article, she snapped. We'll see, he murmured. Back at Carsely, Mrs. Bloxby spotted them from the vicarage gate. Mrs. Raisin, you've been busy. Investigating, said Agatha a little too proudly. And surviving Mr. Silver, I hope. Roy kissed Mrs. Bloxby's hand extravagantly. She adores me, really. Of course she does, said Mrs. Bloxby kindly, though Hodge might argue otherwise. Indeed, when they entered the cottage, Hodge was perched on the armchair, tail swishing with disapproval. Roy recoiled. That animal still looks at me as if I'm a burglar. He's an excellent judge of character, said Agatha, hanging up her coat. Roy flopped onto the sofa. So what now, detective? We've got a mysterious E, a missing bottle, and one fabulous potential press story. Now, said Agatha, lighting a cigarette, I think before we act, which is your cue to leave. Leave? Yes, back to London. Spread your chaos somewhere useful. He pouted. You'll miss me. Like a migraine, she said. When he'd finally gone, in a flurry of exhaust and self-importance, Agatha stood at the window, watching the drizzle silver the road. Hodge jumped onto the sill beside her, purring faintly. Don't look smug, she murmured. You like him, really. The cat blinked slowly, unconvinced. Agatha sighed, glancing at the empty perfume bottle she'd brought home for research. The scent still lingered, faint and lovely, like a memory of vanity. One missing bottle, she said softly, and one dead woman who thought she could fake everything, even success. She tapped ash into the tray, her reflection wavering in the glass. Well, Hodge, she said, if Roy's right and I'm a murder magnet, I might as well enjoy the attention. The cat yawned. Outside, the rain thickened and the Cotswold hills dissolved into mist, peaceful, deceptive, and scented, faintly, with danger. The drizzle had matured into a full, respectable rain by the time Agatha Raisin and Charles Fraith set off for Evesham. Agatha, hunched in the passenger seat of Charles's vintage convertible beneath his useless tartan umbrella, was already regretting her decision. You could have brought the roof up, she snapped. Where's your sense of adventure? Charles replied, grinning. Rain dripped elegantly from his nose. Besides, the car's allergic to modernity. You're allergic to common sense. The wind howled past. Agatha's leopard print scarf flapped like a distress flag. She consoled herself with the thought that if they were spotted, at least the villagers would know she was conducting serious detective work, not joyriding with a man who smelled faintly of expensive soap and entitlement. The Evesham Hotel was a genteel affair. Georgian frontage, brass planters, and a faint air of scandal barely concealed by polish. Inside, Agatha shook herself dry and surveyed the lobby. Thick carpet, polite staff, and the comforting smell of money. Charles approached the reception desk, all lazy charm. We're here to see Mr. Edward Lacey, he told the young receptionist, who blushed as if royalty had addressed her. Tell him friends from Carsely have called. Of course, my lord, she said automatically, then flushed crimson. Agatha rolled her eyes. Honestly, Charles, you'd flirt with a lamppost if it flickered. Only the well-lit ones, he said pleasantly. Moments later they were ushered into the hotel lounge, all chintz, ticking clocks, and the faint smell of furniture polish. Edward Lacey rose to greet them, a tall, silver-haired man in a navy blazer. His face bore the kind of tan that came from golf rather than gardening. Mrs. Raisin, Lord Fraith, he said smoothly. To what do I owe the pleasure? We're investigating Delilah Trent's death, said Agatha briskly, taking a seat without waiting to be asked. You were seen with her the morning she died. Lacey's expression did not falter. Ah, a tragic business. I merely wished to settle a financial matter. Nothing sinister, I assure you. You lent her money? A small sum. Delilah was a friend of my late wife who employed her years ago. I helped her start that wretched perfume business. He sighed. She was always ambitious, always reaching above her station. Agatha bristled at that, perhaps too personally. Ambition's not a crime. No, but fraud is, he replied, stirring his coffee. I discovered she'd been using synthetic compounds in her so-called organic scents. When I demanded repayment, she panicked. Poor thing. I had no wish to harm her. Charles watched him with mild amusement, swirling his brandy. You sound remarkably composed for a man whose friend just died in front of half of Carsely. Lacey smiled thinly. I'm old enough to know hysteria helps no one. Agatha leaned forward. What sort of compounds? Industrial solvents, he said vaguely. Cheap and potent. I warned her they were dangerous. Agatha's eyes narrowed. You seem to know rather a lot about chemicals for a retired businessman. He hesitated. I was a chemist before my wife's inheritance made further work unnecessary. How convenient, she said, voice dry as gin. Charles coughed to hide a laugh. Agatha, darling, subtlety, remember? This is subtle, she snapped. As Lacey reached for his jacket, a small glass vial slipped from the inside pocket and rolled across the carpet, stopping at Agatha's shoe. She bent swiftly, picking it up. "What's this?" "A sample," he said too quickly. "Old habit. I still dabble in formulas for friends." The vial contained a clear liquid, faintly perfumed. Agatha held it to her nose and then thought better of it. "Smells like trouble to me." Lacey took it back with forced calm. "I assure you, Mrs. Raisin, it's perfectly harmless." "So was Delilah's perfume," she said. They left soon after, though not before Charles insisted on paying the bill for 2 drinks Agatha hadn't wanted and a scone she hadn't eaten. Outside, rain slicked the hotel car park. The silver Jaguar gleamed beneath a streetlight. Agatha stared at it, arms folded. "He's lying," she said flatly. "Undoubtedly," said Charles, "but he does it beautifully. I almost admire him." "You would. He's your type, rich, charming, and allergic to hard work." Charles grinned. "Jealous?" "Of what?" "The Jaguar, obviously." "Ha! The only thing I envy about that man is his parking space." They drove back toward Carsely, the rain easing to a mist. Agatha smoked in silence, lost in thought. The smell of the perfume lingered in her mind, sweet and chemical, like a factory trying to be a rose garden. "You know," she said finally, "if Delilah was mixing industrial chemicals into perfume, someone had to get them for her. You can't buy that sort of thing from Boots." "So, we track her suppliers?" Charles asked lazily. "Exactly, but we'll start with Bill. He'll have the toxicology results by now." "Bill won't thank you for storming into the station." "I'm not storming, I'm assisting." "Ah, yes," said Charles. "The Agatha Raisin definition of assisting, ignoring police instructions and terrifying witnesses." "It works," she said. By the time they reached Mercester Police Station, the drizzle had been replaced by twilight. The town glowed faintly under sodium lamps, and somewhere a takeaway smelled suspiciously good. Agatha's stomach growled. Charles raised an eyebrow. "Detective work runs on nerves and carbohydrates," she said defensively. Inside, Bill Wong met them with an expression halfway between affection and despair. "Agatha, I should have known you wouldn't stay out of it." "You sound disappointed," she said. "I am, mostly in myself for hoping otherwise." He led them into a small interview room, closing the door. "Right, toxicology came back this afternoon. It's not cyanide." "Ha," said Agatha. "I told you it smelled wrong." "You also said you'd stop investigating." "That was before you knew how right I was." Bill's patience frayed only slightly. "The compound's called ethyl isocyanate. It's industrial, used in adhesives, resins, that sort of thing. Extremely toxic, especially when inhaled." "So it was gas," Agatha exclaimed. "That perfume bottle wasn't perfume at all." "Not quite," said Bill. "Mixed properly, it could pass as scent. But a slight change in temperature and—" he snapped his fingers. "Lethal vapor." Charles gave a low whistle. "Nasty business. And very specific knowledge required." Agatha nodded slowly. "Meaning Mr. Lacey. Chemist. Motive? Blackmail or revenge?" "Careful," Bill warned. "He's got an alibi. CCTV shows him leaving the hotel after your little visit." "Before or after he pocketed his vial?" Bill blinked. "What vial?" Agatha smiled innocently. "Oh, nothing important. Just evidence." "Agatha, you'll thank me later," she said, rising. As they left, Charles chuckled. "You do realize you've probably just implicated yourself in theft of police evidence." "If it leads to justice," she said briskly, "I'll risk it." "You mean if it leads to being right," he corrected. "Same thing," she said. Back in Carsely, the rain had stopped entirely. The night was still, the village asleep except for the occasional glow of a telly behind curtains. Agatha parked outside her cottage, exhaustion creeping in. Charles lingered at the gate. "You know, Agatha, for a woman who claims not to care about romance, you spend a remarkable amount of time chasing men." "They just happen to be near the bodies," she retorted. "So do you," he said lightly, then tipped his hat. "Good night, my dear detective." She watched him drive away, the sound of his engine fading into the mist. Inside, Hodge greeted her with his usual disdainful stretch. "Don't start," she said, bending to scratch his head. "You're the only man in my life who doesn't lie." He purred faintly, more from convenience than affection. Agatha poured herself a small gin and stared out at the rain-slick road. Somewhere in Evesham, Edward Lacey was polishing his Jaguar, perhaps congratulating himself on fooling her. "Enjoy it while you can," she murmured, "because next time I'll have proof." She lit a cigarette, the smoke curling lazily in the lamplight. Hodge blinked from the armchair, unimpressed. "Yes, yes," she said, exhaling. "I know, I always say that." Outside, the night smelled faintly of damp roses and something sharper, the lingering scent of trouble. Carsely's church fete was one of those annual rituals that arrived with the inevitability of rain and the illusion of cheer. By 10 o'clock that Saturday morning, the vicarage lawn was alive with bunting, stalls, and the sound of the WI attempting to harmonize over Jerusalem. Mrs. Bloxby, serene and efficient as ever, moved through the chaos like a general in pearls. Agatha Raisin, meanwhile, stood beneath a dripping gazebo beside the raffle table, glaring at a pile of prize hampers. Her mood matched the weather, grey with irritation. "Smile, dear," murmured Mrs. Bloxby, passing with a tray of scones. "You're meant to look festive." "I'm only here because it's in memory of Delilah," Agatha muttered. "I'm still not convinced she deserves sainthood. Murder victim or not, she was a menace in heels." "Be kind," said Mrs. Bloxby gently. "The Fate Committee felt it right to dedicate this year's proceeds to a women's charity. It helps people start over." "She could have used that advice," Agatha replied dryly. The drizzle thickened, dripping through the tent roof onto the jam jars. Across the green, Roy Silver was attempting to hang a banner that read Cotswold Charm in Bloom, though the wind kept turning it into Cotswold Harm in Boom. "Perfect," Agatha muttered. "Truth in advertising for once." Mrs. Jessup, Carsely's chief gossip and Agatha's unofficial nemesis, appeared like an omen, her umbrella snapping open with menace. "So nice of you to turn up, Mrs. Raisin. I suppose murder publicity does wonders for one's social calendar." Agatha fixed her with a sweet, venomous smile. "It's always a pleasure to see you, Mrs. Jessup. Reminds me that some people still believe in reincarnation, as wasps." "Oh, I do admire your wit," Mrs. Jessup said, voice sharp as vinegar. "But people are talking. They say you only involve yourself in these cases to impress Lord Fraith." Agatha's jaw tightened. "People or you?" "Same thing, really." Mrs. Jessup sashayed away before Agatha could retort. "Ignore her," said Mrs. Bloxby, reappearing with tea. "Envy is the sincerest form of flattery. It's also the noisiest." Agatha muttered. The fete proceeded with all the grace of a damp circus. The tombola jammed, the brass band played one tune on repeat, and the cake competition turned ugly when Doris Simpson accused someone of using packet mix. Roy, dressed in an offensively bright anorak, hovered near the raffle prizes, sniffing the air. "Darling," he said, eyes watering, "why does everything smell so ghastly?" Agatha followed his gaze to the table of donated prizes, wine bottles, chocolates, and a basket of toiletries. Among them, she spotted several perfume bottles. "Where did those come from?" "Delilah's shop," Roy said proudly. "I found them in a box marked promotional samples. I thought they'd give the prizes a touch of glamour." Agatha froze. "You didn't open them, did you?" "Of course I did. They were half full. Waste not, want not." "Roy," she began too late. He had already picked up a bottle labelled Noon Bloom and was spritzing it liberally over the prizes. Within seconds, the air thickened with scent. The brass band faltered mid-note as villagers began coughing. Doris Simpson sneezed violently into a Victoria sponge. Even Mrs. Bloxby blinked, fanning herself with the church programme. "Roy!" Agatha barked. "Stop spraying that! For heaven's sake, that could be the same batch that killed Delilah." Roy froze, atomizer still raised. "Oh, don't be melodramatic. It's perfectly—" He sneezed again, eyes streaming. "Harmless." "Put it down before you gas the clergy," Agatha ordered, snatching the bottle and sealing it in a sandwich bag. "One corpse per summer is quite enough." Bill Wong appeared moments later, summoned by some sixth sense of police timing. "I heard someone say poison," he said, surveying the chaos. "You always hear that when I'm around," said Agatha. "Coincidence, I assure you." Bill looked unconvinced. "What are you doing with that bottle?" "Preventing a chemical disaster. Roy's been trying to kill the raffle committee." "It was only fragrance," Roy protested. "Besides, I feel marvellous." "You look embalmed," Agatha said. As Mrs. Bloxby soothed the wheezing bandmaster, Bill drew Agatha aside. "You might find this interesting," he said quietly. "We traced those industrial compounds. Turns out a chemist in Mercester sold solvent drums to Delilah last month." "Under her own name?" "No, under D. Trent Laboratories. Rather grand, don't you think? Agatha frowned. So she wasn't just mixing perfumes for vanity. She was experimenting, or stealing something worth hiding. Possibly, said Bill. We also found an old employment record. Delilah volunteered at a hospital lab back in the 80s. She'd have known her way around chemicals. A hospital lab? Agatha's mind ticked over. Then maybe this wasn't about romance or blackmail at all. Maybe it was about theft, a stolen formula. That's a leap. Not for me, said Agatha. I'm practically an acrobat of logic. More like a gymnast on a trampoline, Bill murmured. Before she could reply, Charles appeared, immaculate despite the mud. Thought I'd find you causing trouble, he said cheerfully. You look ravishingly cross. Mrs. Jessup's been spreading rumours, Agatha snapped. Apparently I only investigate murders to get your attention. Well, it's working, he said lightly. She shot him a look sharp enough to cut through the drizzle. Don't start, he smiled. Wouldn't dream of it. Though if you're done terrifying the clergy, perhaps you'd join me for tea. Later, she said, watching Bill walk off with the confiscated perfume. Something stinks worse than Roy's aftershave, and I mean to find out what. By mid-afternoon, the fate recovered its equilibrium. The brass band resumed, Mrs. Bloxby's scones won first prize by popular vote, and Roy, ever the showman, volunteered to auction off the raffle leftovers. We have here a bottle of slightly controversial perfume, he announced, guaranteed to make an impression, possibly permanent. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Even Agatha smiled grudgingly. Roy was impossible, infuriating, and occasionally useful. As the villagers drifted home, Mrs. Bloxby joined her under the gazebo, tidying paper cups. You did well, you know, she said softly. If that perfume had truly been dangerous— It's always dangerous when Roy's around, Agatha interrupted. Mrs. Bloxby's smile was kind. You're very fond of them all, really. Agatha sniffed. Fondness is overrated. I prefer competence. Then you'd better find some, Mrs. Bloxby said mildly, gathering napkins. When the last bunting came down, Agatha walked home through the damp lanes. Carsely glowed faintly in the mist, the cottages golden against the grey. She lit a cigarette, her thoughts racing. Delilah's lab experience, the solvents, the missing formula, it all pointed to something bigger than vanity or revenge. Someone had wanted her silenced and not for love. At home, Hodge was waiting, tail twitching, expression lofty. Agatha poured herself a small glass of wine and sank into her armchair. You missed the fete, she told him. Lucky you. You'd have hated the music. He yawned, unimpressed. Mrs. Jessup says I'm using murder for attention, Agatha went on. If only. All it gets me is a sore back and mud on my shoes. Hodge blinked lazily, curling into sleep. Still, she said, swirling her wine, I might be onto something. And if I'm right, it's not romance that killed Delilah. It's greed and chemistry. She stubbed out her cigarette, watching the smoke twist in the lamplight. Same ingredients, really. Outside, the drizzle had softened to mist again, shrouding the village in the gentle secrecy it did so well. The following morning dawned cold, bright and smug, the sort of Cotswold day that looked picturesque but felt personal. Agatha Raisin stood in her kitchen staring into her coffee as though it might provide answers. Hodge yawned on the windowsill, unimpressed by both mystery and mortality. The newspaper headline, Perfume Murder Still Unsolved, glared up from the table. The accompanying photo was unflattering. Agatha looked as though she'd been caught halfway between suspicion and indigestion. If that's my best angle, she muttered, lighting a cigarette, I might as well give up detecting and start haunting people instead. She'd spent half the night turning over the pieces of the puzzle. Edward Lacey, chemist. Delilah, thief. Solvents, perfume and scandal. But it wasn't adding up. Someone had gone to great lengths to disguise murder as vanity, and the motive, she suspected, wasn't love, it was envy. Mrs. Bloxby arrived mid-morning, armed with a tray of biscuits and quiet sympathy. You shouldn't skip breakfast, she said gently, setting down the plate. I can't eat when I'm thinking. You seem to think best when you're nibbling. Agatha ignored her and flipped through her notes. Bill says Delilah worked with someone at a hospital lab years ago, a woman named Eleanor Blunt. Apparently she still lives in Mercester, teaches chemistry at the girls' school. I'm going to talk to her. Mrs. Bloxby smiled faintly. Try to be tactful. Tact is for people with time, Agatha said, grabbing her handbag. I have murder. Mercester Girls' School sat behind an imposing gate and a sign that promised excellence through discipline. Agatha felt judged before she'd even parked. Inside, the smell of chalk and disinfectant brought back unpleasant memories of her own school days, mostly detentions and gym skirts. She found Eleanor Blunt in a small laboratory, tidying shelves with the precision of a woman who trusted order more than people. She was plain, sparely built, with iron-grey hair pinned neatly and spectacles that magnified her eyes. "Mrs. Raisin?" she said, as if testing the name for quality. "I've heard of you." "Not all of it's true," Agatha replied. "I wanted to ask about Delilah Trent." Eleanor's hand froze on a bottle of phenolphthalein. "I wondered when someone would." "You knew her well?" "Too well. We worked together in London. She was bright, ambitious, and dishonest. She stole one of my formulas, a stabilizer I'd developed to make perfume last longer without turning rancid. A simple improvement, but she patented it under her name, made a fortune while I was marking homework." Agatha felt a small, sour stab of recognition. "And you never confronted her?" "Once. She laughed and said I should be grateful for the inspiration." "So you hated her?" Eleanor turned, her expression unreadable. "I pitied her. That's worse, isn't it?" Agatha studied her. The woman's lab coat was spotless, her shoes sensible, her voice calm, all the things Agatha herself wasn't. But beneath the composure, there was a quiet ache that Agatha recognized too well. "You know," she said lightly, "envy makes excellent fuel. Keeps one warm on cold nights." Eleanor smiled thinly. "Until it burns through the house." "Touché," Agatha said. "Did you ever see her again?" "Once, a few weeks ago. She came to my door, said she wanted to make peace. She was terrified of something, or someone. I told her to go to the police, but she just kept saying, 'He knows.' Then she left." "He?" Meaning Edward Lacey. "Perhaps. He managed our lab once before Delilah married into money. Clever man, but vain. He thought rules were suggestions." Agatha frowned. What did Delilah mean by "he knows"? "No idea," said Eleanor, but there was hesitation in her tone, the faintest tremor. "I thought she'd finally gone mad. Now I suppose she had reason to be afraid." Agatha leaned on the workbench, watching her. "You didn't kill her." "Thank you for the reassurance. I mean it. You're too tidy." Eleanor laughed softly, a brittle sound. "Tidy people kill all the time. We just clean up better." For a moment, Agatha didn't know whether to laugh or reach for the door. Instead, she said, "You wanted credit, not revenge, but someone overheard your argument, and that someone decided to make sure Delilah could never confess." Eleanor met her gaze evenly. "You think that man in the Jaguar did it?" "I think he's involved, but he's too careful to get his own hands dirty. Someone else handled the poison." Eleanor hesitated, then pulled open a drawer. "There's something you should see." Inside was a faded folder marked Trent Formula, Original Notes. She laid it on the bench and flipped it open. The first page bore the stabilizer's name, EIC27, Ethyl Isocyanate Compound. Agatha blinked. "That's what Bill said killed her, this exact chemical." "It's obsolete," Eleanor said quietly. "No one's used it for decades. Dangerous, unstable, and banned outside industrial work. The only samples left were locked away in the hospital's storage room. You'd need access and authorization to remove it." "And who would have that?" "Lacey," she said flatly. "He signed off the storage log years ago." Agatha felt the pieces shift into something darker. Then it wasn't just vanity. He killed her to bury a theft. "Perhaps. Or perhaps someone wanted you to think that," said Eleanor, closing the folder. "Be careful, Mrs. Raisin. People who mix chemicals and secrets tend to leave explosions behind." Agatha managed a brisk nod, though her pulse had quickened. Back in Carsely, the rain had started again, soft and persistent. Agatha drove straight to the Red Lion, craving warmth and gossip in equal measure. The pub was half full. Charles was at the bar nursing a whiskey, and Bill Wong was hunched over a file in the corner. "Good heavens," said Charles, "the triumvirate of trouble reunited." "Save the charm," Agatha said, dropping into the chair opposite Bill. "I've just met Delilah's lab partner. She's not our killer." Bill looked up. "I didn't think she was, but she did confirm something. We checked Lacey's records. He once managed the same hospital lab where that compound was stored. And guess what? One drum went missing 6 months ago. Let me guess, Agatha said grimly. He signed it out. No, someone else did. He slid a sheet of paper toward her. On it was a photocopy of a requisition form, faint but legible. Signature, A. Raisin. Agatha stared. That's ridiculous. I've never even seen one of those forms. It was faxed from your number at home, Bill said gently. We traced it through the phone log. My home fax? That ancient machine that eats paper? The same. We think someone forged your name, possibly to implicate you. Charles chuckled. Congratulations, Agatha. You've officially become part of the crime. Not funny, she snapped. Who'd even know my fax number? Half the village, said Bill. You used it to send the WI newsletter last year. Never again, she muttered. Bill's tone softened. We'll sort it, but whoever forged that form had access to both your number and Delilah's records, which narrows it to someone close to her or to you. Close to me? She said incredulously. Unless Hodges learned to type, that's impossible. Charles sipped his drink, watching her with amusement. Oh, I don't know. You've annoyed enough people. Someone might be framing you out of civic duty. Agatha glared. I'm being set up, and you're making jokes. Laughter is a survival instinct, said Charles. Bill leaned forward. Listen, whoever did this wants the trail to point at you. Stay out of it until we've cleared your name, please. Stay out of it, Agatha repeated. Bill, that's like telling a cat not to chase a mouse. Cats end up stuck in trees, he said. Then I'll buy a ladder. Charles smirked. You're magnificent when you're furious. Shut up. She rose, grabbed her coat, and left before either could stop her. Outside, the rain blurred the streetlights into pale halos. She walked fast, her thoughts darting like fish in murky water. Someone had used her name, her identity, to order the chemical that killed Delilah. And that meant they knew her habits, her equipment, and her ego. At home, she poured a gin without taking off her coat. Hodge leapt onto the table, tail swishing. Don't look at me like that, she said. It's not my fault people can't keep their hands off my stationery. He blinked, unimpressed. Agatha sat down heavily, the old fax machine in the corner blinking its red light as if mocking her. She stared at it for a long moment, then stubbed out her cigarette and muttered, You know, Hodge, there's a very thin line between being clever and being blamed. The cat stretched, curling back into his cushion. Outside, the rain whispered against the window, soft as gossip, and every bit as dangerous. It began, as all humiliations in Carsely seemed to, with a knock at Agatha Raisin's door just as she was halfway through her first cigarette, and not yet human. 2 uniformed officers stood on her doorstep, rain dripping off their caps. Between them hovered Inspector Wilkes, Mercester CID's answer to a bad hangover. Mrs. Raisin, he said dourly, we need a word about a certain invoice. If it's from the wine club, I've already paid, Agatha replied, grinding her cigarette out against the doorframe. Toxic chemicals, he said, your name, your signature, your home fax number. Agatha's pulse skipped. Oh, that invoice. You admit it, then? Of course not, but I've grown used to being blamed for things beyond my control. Weather, murder, men. Wilkes pushed past her. We'll take a look at your fax machine, if you don't mind. Actually, I do, said Agatha. But you'll do it anyway, so go ahead. Hodge, offended by intrusion, fled upstairs with his tail puffed like a feather duster. Bill Wong arrived soon after, looking both apologetic and amused. Agatha, we've verified the purchase order. The chemical was sent to Delilah Trent's shop 2 weeks before her death. It bears your name and your fax number. Someone's framing me. Or using your dramatic flair, said Bill mildly. I'd suggest you think who might have done that. Agatha's mind flashed through the usual suspects, Charles, Mrs. Jessup, the postman who disliked her hedge, before landing on one shining, irritating name. Roy, she said darkly. Roy Silver arrived from London in his trademark storm of perfume and self-regard. He swept into the cottage as if entering a stage. Darling, don't look at me like that. I come in peace and sequins. You've landed me in police trouble, you fool, Agatha snapped. Did you or did you not use my name to order chemicals for your ridiculous publicity stunt? Roy blinked innocently. I might have, very slightly, used your letterhead, but only because it looked so frightfully professional. It was for that perfume launch idea, Eau de Danger. You forged my signature. It was more of an artistic imitation. Agatha's hands clenched. Roy, do you realize you've just made me an accessory to murder? Well, he said brightly, it's better press than insider trading. Get out before I throw you out, she said, voice shaking. He hesitated, looking suddenly small. Aggie, I didn't know, honestly. I thought the chemical was some harmless lab prop. Please don't hate me. Oh, I'll decide that later. Right now, I have to prove it wasn't me. You mean us, said Roy, recovering his spark. I'm in this with you now, purely out of friendship and self-preservation. Fine, you can start by holding your tongue. By the time Bill returned that afternoon, Agatha's temper had simmered into icy determination. She refused to be the butt of another Carsely scandal. We're running tests, said Bill, but Wilkes is convinced you're mixed up in it. Wilkes couldn't detect a fish in a fishmonger's, Agatha retorted. I'll show him how real sleuthing's done. Agatha, no, Bill. I'm going to reconstruct the crime. Oh dear, he said softly, but she was already reaching for her coat. The Red Lion smelled of ale and furniture polish. Agatha had bullied the landlord, Fred Jessup, into closing the side room for investigative purposes. Charles sat at a corner table nursing a whiskey, looking entertained. You realize, he said, that you're about to make a spectacle of yourself again. Good, said Agatha. Better a spectacle than a suspect. Roy, still fragile from guilt, was setting up props, a tea tray, a glass, and several bottles labelled Perfume. You've really outdone yourself, darling, he said. It's like an Agatha Raisin roadshow. You'll be the one under the road if this doesn't work, she replied. Bill appeared just as she was arranging chairs. I can't believe I'm letting this happen, he murmured. Then don't, she said. Just observe, like a proper policeman. She gestured dramatically. At exactly noon on the day in question, Delilah Trent sat here, beneath the window. Sunlight streamed through. She was demonstrating her perfume when she collapsed. So, we recreate it. You're not spraying actual poison, are you? Said Charles. Of course not. Roy's provided diluted scent. Harmless. I checked. You checked with Roy? Said Bill. Agatha ignored him. Charles, you'll narrate. You love the sound of your own voice. Roy, you'll play Delilah. Typecasting, said Roy, tossing his fringe. And I, said Agatha, will play myself, the innocent bystander wrongfully accused. Ah, yes, Charles murmured, the role of a lifetime. The clock struck 12. Sunlight filtered through the window, glancing off the brass fixtures. Roy, in a scarf that might have doubled as a sail, fluttered theatrically into position. Welcome, ladies, he intoned in falsetto. Today I reveal my newest creation, Noon Bloom. Agatha rolled her eyes. Less cabaret, more accuracy. He dabbed the perfume on his wrist and waved it under the beam of light. Within moments the air thickened with scent. Now imagine, said Agatha, pacing, that the real perfume contained the chemical stabilizer, ethyl isocyanate. When heated, it emits toxic vapor. Charles leaned back. So, you're saying the sunlight itself triggered the poison? Exactly. The glass concentrated the heat. Delilah's bottle was in direct line of that beam. Whoever placed her there knew it would happen, and knew chemistry. Bill frowned. That would narrow it to Edward Lacey or Eleanor Blunt. Precisely. Roy gave a sudden sneeze. Oh, heavens, my sinuses. Dramatic effect, Agatha said, pleased. No, Roy sniffed, eyes watering. I think I'm allergic to your innocence. Charles chuckled. He's got a point. Agatha glared. Focus. This proves Delilah wasn't poisoned by accident. She was positioned. Bill crossed his arms. It's clever, Agatha, but still circumstantial. We can't arrest sunlight. No, but we can follow shadows, she said. The phrase pleased her so much she nearly repeated it. They packed up amid the bemused stares of lunchtime drinkers. Roy insisted on narrating his own death scene to anyone who'd listen. Outside, the drizzle had started again, faint and persistent. Agatha and Charles lingered on the pavement, both damp and thoughtful. You do realize, Charles said, you've now made yourself even more suspicious. Reenacting crimes is practically an admission of guilt in Wilkes's book. Then Wilkes's book should be pulped, said Agatha. The man couldn't solve a crossword. Charles smiled faintly. Still, you enjoy this, don't you? The chase, the danger, the performance. "Don't be absurd," she said, lighting a cigarette. "I'd rather be home with gin and a sensible cat." "Liar," he said fondly. She exhaled smoke in his direction. "Maybe, but at least I lie with flair." Bill joined them, looking resigned. "The reconstruction's got the lab interested. They're testing a sample of the original perfume for heat-reactive compounds. You might be right, Agatha." "Of course I'm right. But I'm afraid there's more bad news. Lacey's disappeared, checked out of the Evesham Hotel this morning, left no forwarding address." Agatha groaned. "Wonderful. The only chemist in the village, and he's gone to ground." "You're not helping by antagonizing the police," Bill warned. "If the police did their jobs faster, I wouldn't have to," she retorted. He sighed. "Just try not to make things worse." "I don't try to make things worse," said Agatha. "It just happens naturally." Back home, Hodge was asleep on her newspaper pile, his paws twitching as if chasing mice through dreams. Agatha sank into her armchair with a sigh. The day's adrenaline had given way to exhaustion, and beneath it, something more brittle, fear. For all her bravado, the idea of being framed unsettled her. She could picture the gossip already swirling through Carsely. That Raisin woman finally went too far. She poured herself a gin and tonic, the glass clinking like punctuation. "Don't look so smug," she told Hodge. "You'd frame me too if you could work a fax machine." He yawned. The phone rang. She snatched it up. "Agatha Raisin," she said crisply. "Aggie, darling," came Roy's voice, bright and nasal. "Just wanted to say sorry again. I've told everyone it was my fault, though it does make a marvellous headline. Village sleuth framed by fragrance. Imagine the column inches." "Roy," she said dangerously, "if you value your life, don't print a single word." "Oh, I wouldn't dream of it, without your approval." "Good, because if I see my name in the Mercester Gazette, I'll turn you into potpourri." "Point taken," he squeaked and hung up. Agatha replaced the receiver with grim satisfaction. Yet as she looked around her cottage, the scattered files, the blinking fax machine, the cat who tolerated her only slightly, she felt a familiar pang. Beneath the humour, beneath the gossip, lay the truth she rarely admitted. She liked the danger because it made her feel needed. Without mysteries, Carsely would hum along perfectly well. Without her, it might even hum more quietly. Nonsense, she told herself aloud. They'd all be dead or bored within a week. Hodge stretched luxuriously, disproving both claims. Agatha smiled despite herself. "All right, maybe 2 weeks." She refilled her glass and gazed out at the rain streaking the window. Somewhere out there, a murderer had turned sunlight into a weapon and had tried to turn her into the perfect scapegoat. Well, they'd picked the wrong woman. She stubbed out her cigarette, rose, and pulled her coat from the peg. Hodge blinked at her as she reached for the door. "Don't wait up," she said. "If I'm not back by midnight, tell Mrs. Bloxby to water the hydrangeas." The cat flicked his tail in lofty indifference. Agatha smiled, a flash of steel beneath weariness. "You're right, Hodge. If anyone's going to frame Agatha Raisin, they'd better be ready for the picture to bite back." The door clicked shut behind her. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the last of the sunset caught the wet pavement, a faint golden shimmer, like perfume on the air. The morning began with a deceptive calm. Carsely lay beneath a thin wash of silver mist, the sort that softened hedgerows and made cottages look almost shy. Agatha Raisin, however, was anything but softened. She paced her kitchen in a cloud of cigarette smoke, plotting what she called a controlled confrontation and what Bill Wong would almost certainly call lunacy. Hodge watched from the table, tail wrapped neatly around himself, the very picture of feline judgment. "Don't start," Agatha muttered. "Someone has to smoke out the truth, and Bill's too fond of his job to risk it." She checked her reflection in the toaster, hair sprayed to defiance, lipstick applied like armour, and grabbed her handbag. Inside were her car keys, 2 bottles of Delilah's remaining perfume, and a small notebook labelled Operation No More. Delilah Trent's boutique in Mercester had stood dark since the murder. The shop front, once a parade of pastels and gilt lettering, looked faded now, its window display of scent bottles gathering dust. Agatha arrived early, opened the door with a borrowed key from Bill. "Don't tell me how you got that," he'd sighed, and inhaled the ghost of sweetness still lingering in the air. "Vanity and death," she murmured. "Trust me to end up in a business meeting with both." She set about her stage, the counter cleared, the electric heater angled toward a single chair, and 1 bottle of perfume, Noon Bloom, placed deliberately beneath the window. The heater's faint hum filled the silence. At exactly 11:30, Charles Fraith sauntered in, hands in pockets, amusement already loaded. "Darling, this looks suspiciously like a trap," he said. "Should I bring flowers or a will?" "You're here to keep things civil," she said. "If I start shouting, distract me with charm." "My specialty," he said, settling in, "though I'm out of practice with women wielding chemical weapons." "Don't be dramatic. The bottle's sealed." "So were most of your best intentions," he murmured. At 11:55, Eleanor Blunt arrived, punctual and austere, carrying a small handbag that might have contained either tissues or thermite. She glanced around the boutique with tight-lipped disapproval. "You wanted to discuss Delilah's estate," she said. "I can't imagine why you needed me." "Because you worked with her," said Agatha briskly. "And because we're reopening the shop. Symbolically. A sort of cleansing of the air." "That seems premature." "Not at all. Closure helps everyone." Before Eleanor could respond, the bell jingled again. Edward Lacey entered, trenchcoat immaculate, expression guarded. "Mrs. Raisin," he said, inclining his head. "I trust this isn't another interrogation." "Just a chat," said Agatha, "between friends of the deceased." Charles offered him a drink of water and an ingratiating smile. "Think of it as a little reunion. Nothing sinister." "Everything you organize is sinister," Lacey muttered, but he sat. The four of them formed an uneasy tableau, Agatha behind the counter, Charles lounging by the display, Eleanor stiff as a ruler, and Lacey fidgeting in the chair nearest the window. "It's remarkable," Agatha began, "how perfume and deceit share the same qualities. Both depend on concentration and timing. A few drops too much and you've ruined the blend." Charles lifted a brow. "Our hostess has been reading again." Lacey frowned. "Is there a point to this?" "Several," said Agatha. "1. Delilah's death wasn't an accident. 2. Someone used knowledge of chemistry to make sure the scent she adored became her undoing." "Still chasing ghosts?" said Eleanor coolly. "No," said Agatha, unscrewing the cap of Noon Bloom with deliberate care. "Chasing truth." A faint floral aroma spread through the room, light and deceptive. The sun, pale all morning, began to edge through the mist, spilling a beam directly across the counter. Agatha set the bottle down near the heater. "You see, when heat meets this stabilizer, it releases gas. Invisible. Lethal. That's how she died. Sunlight through the Red Lion window at lunchtime. Ingenious, really." Lacey's hand twitched. "That's absurd." "Is it?" The heater's element glowed faintly red. The air warmed. "You might want to step back," Charles murmured. "Nonsense," said Agatha. "We're perfectly safe. Unless, of course, the perfume happens to be the same batch that killed her." "Good God!" Lacey shot up, knocking over his chair. "Turn that thing off." Eleanor didn't move. "You see?" she said quietly. "He knows exactly what it does." Agatha's eyes narrowed. "Funny, isn't it? The innocent tend to freeze, not flee." "You mad woman," Lacey barked, sweat beading his temple. "You've no idea." "Oh, I have every idea," she said. "You poisoned her. You ordered the chemical under my name, and you've been terrified ever since that the wrong bottle might find its way to you." "That's not true." "Then sit down," she said. But he couldn't. His composure cracked. He stumbled backward, eyes darting to the window as if escape could erase guilt. "All right," he shouted suddenly. "All right, yes, I did it. But she drove me to it." Charles leaned against the counter, intrigued. Ah, the traditional defense of cowards and lovers. "She blackmailed me," Lacey said hoarsely. "My wife discovered Delilah's theft years ago, the formula she stole from Eleanor here. When she died, Delilah demanded money to keep quiet. Said she'd tell the board I'd falsified safety certificates. I only wanted to frighten her. I thought the scent would make her ill, not—" He broke off, breathing hard. "Not kill her," Agatha finished. "Yes, I meant to ruin her reputation, not her lungs." Eleanor's voice was steady but cold. "You used my work, again, for your vanity." "Don't moralize," Lacey snarled. "You'd have done the same if anyone noticed you existed." Agatha stepped between them. "That's enough." The heater hissed softly. For a moment everyone was still, and then a faint chemical tang bit the air. "Oh, wonderful," said Charles. "Your experiment's becoming literal." "Out," said Agatha. "Everyone out." They burst into the street coughing, eyes streaming. Wilkes and Bill Wong, arriving by some blessed instinct, stared as they stumbled from the boutique like escapees from a séance. "What the hell?" began Wilkes. "Confession," Agatha wheezed. "In stereo. You can thank me later." Bill hurried to open the door wide, letting the fumes disperse. "Agatha, you could have killed yourself." "Nonsense, only singed my nerves." She wiped her eyes with a handkerchief that had once been white. Besides, it worked. He admitted everything. "Technically," said Charles, coughing delicately, he also accused himself of bad PR. "You're welcome," she said tartly. An hour later, the boutique stood cordoned off, police bustling in and out while Agatha sat on the curb with a paper cup of water and the smug exhaustion of a cat that had finally caught its mouse. Bill crouched beside her. "You know, you're infuriating." "So I've been told," she said, taking a drag from the cigarette she wasn't supposed to light. "You could have waited for us." "I did wait. You just arrived at the finale." "Lucky us," he sighed. "We've got Lacey's statement. He'll plead manslaughter, probably. Said he panicked when Delilah demanded more money, thought she'd ruin him, so he doctored the scent, and fate did the rest." "Fate," said Agatha, blowing smoke. "Always the accomplice." "And Eleanor?" "No charges, though I wouldn't want to be on her Christmas list." Bill gave her a small smile. "Well done, Aggie. Again." "Don't start calling me that. It sounds like a Labrador." "Fine. Mrs. Raisin, then." "Better." Charles wandered over, hands in pockets. "Heroine of the hour," he said lightly. "The village will dine on this for months." "They'd better bring wine," she said, "or perfume." "Ha ha." He bent slightly, lowering his voice. "You know, Agatha, for a woman who claims to hate drama, you stage it magnificently." She looked at him, half smiling, half tired. "And for a man who claims to avoid work, you turn up at every crime scene." "Perhaps I just like the company." "Liar," she said fondly. "Completely," he agreed. Bill's radio crackled and he moved off, leaving the two of them watching the last of the evidence bags disappear into the police car. The mist had lifted. Sunlight caught the pavement in thin golden streaks. "So," said Charles, "how does it feel to be vindicated?" "Like indigestion," she said. "Justice always tastes better in theory." "Then have a drink. You've earned it." "No, I'm going home to feed the cat. He's less trouble than you lot." "Barely," he murmured. Carsely greeted her with its usual calm. Children on bicycles, Mrs. Bloxby in her garden, Doris Simpson hanging washing with the efficiency of a general. The ordinary world rolled on, stubbornly indifferent to murder. Inside her cottage, Hodge sat waiting, as if he'd known she would return triumphant and smelling faintly of smoke. "Don't look so smug," she told him, hanging up her coat. "It's all over." He yawned. Agatha poured herself a small gin and leaned against the counter. The window glowed with late afternoon light, soft and golden, the very image of peace. Yet she felt none. Beneath the satisfaction was an ache she couldn't name, something between loneliness and fatigue. "You know, Hodge," she said, "I risk my life to prove I'm clever, and what do I win? An evening alone with a cat who disapproves of me." He stretched, unimpressed, and began washing his paw. "Typical male," she said, "affection only when it suits you." Still, she smiled, because at least Hodge never lied. She took her drink to the armchair and switched on the radio. Some bland announcer was droning about weather in the Midlands. Agatha closed her eyes. The smell of gin and faint perfume still lingered in the air, sweet, bitter, and human. "Vanity may smell sweet," she murmured, half to herself, half to the cat. "But murder always stinks." Hodge blinked slowly, unimpressed with philosophy. "All right," said Agatha, stubbing out her cigarette. "You win. Supper first, wisdom later." She rose, poured kibble into his bowl, and opened a tin of something that claimed to be chicken. Hodge descended like a king to his throne. Outside, the last light faded from the hills. The village settled back into its rhythm, unaware that its most troublesome detective had, yet again, restored order, and slightly singed her fringe doing it. Agatha watched the cat eat, then allowed herself a small laugh. "You know, Hodge," she said softly, "I think I'll stick to solving crimes. Relationships are far more dangerous." And with that, she poured another gin, sat by the window, and watched the mist creep back across Carsely, a soft, forgiving veil over a village that never stayed peaceful for long. Carsely did its best to forget murder. Villagers are good at that. The hedgerows thickened, the drizzle returned to its natural station, and the Red Lion resumed smelling only of beer, gravy, and mild disappointment. Delilah Trent became a cautionary anecdote about glamour and tax evasion, folded neatly into local gossip. Agatha Raisin, having survived police interviews, chemical vapours, and Roy's apologies, found herself oddly flat. Victory never looked quite as flattering as she expected. It left shadows under her eyes and toast crumbs on the sofa. On a damp Tuesday evening, the WI held an emergency meeting in the hall titled Fragrance Safety Policy. Agatha attended, partly from curiosity, partly to ensure they didn't ban perfume entirely. She refused to live in a world policed by sandalwood soap. Mrs. Bloxby chaired with gentle firmness. We must agree that all products used at our events are properly labelled and safe, and not from discount stalls in Mercester Market, Mrs. Jessup added sharply, eyeing Agatha. I'll have you know, said Agatha, my toiletries are more thoroughly vetted than most marriages. A polite ripple of laughter. Mrs. Bloxby moved on. A draft resolution was read, amended, and finally passed. The WI would henceforth require ingredient lists, safety sheets, and common sense. The last clause was considered optimistic. Afterwards, over tea, Doris Simpson leaned in. Still, Mrs. Raisin, if you hadn't meddled, that man would have got away with it. Agatha attempted modesty. I only did what anyone would. No, dear, Doris said. Most of us would have gone home. Outside, drizzle dusted the streetlights as Agatha walked back. She felt curiously transparent without a case to occupy her. The village seemed to close around its routines again, leaving her slightly outside the circle, smoking on the verge. A few days later, Roy telephoned in high excitement. Darling, promise you won't kill me. Start with something realistic, said Agatha. I sold the story, a tasteful exclusive for the Daily Echo. You're portrayed as enigmatic and dangerous. They insisted on airbrushing, so you look 12. Roy! You'll thank me. Infamy is marvellous for business. She slammed the receiver down 3 times, which was less satisfying on a landline. Still, a treacherous part of her wondered how she looked in newsprint these days. Charles departed quietly soon after. One morning his convertible vanished from its usual disdainful angle outside his manor. A postcard arrived. A French harbour, boats and sun. Gone to breathe cleaner air. Don't poison anyone without me. See. Agatha snorted, folding it away in a drawer she would later pretend not to check. Bill Wong visited the following Sunday, bearing a small brown paper parcel. Peace offering, he said. You've nothing to apologise for, she replied, for once. Inside was a modest glass bottle of rose perfume. From my mum, Bill said half shy. Her friend makes it. No chemicals. Thought it might mask the gin. Agatha's throat tightened unexpectedly. Cheek, she said. Thank her for me. Life slid back into its shabby, comforting rhythm. The Red Lion reclaimed her at lunchtimes. Carsely's gossip shifted to potholes, hymn choices, and whether Roy's jacket was a sin. Even Mrs. Jessup reduced her accusations to little sighs. One bright noon, sunlight slanted across Agatha's sitting room, catching on a single empty bottle on the mantelpiece, the last of Delilah's noon bloom, scrubbed clean, a relic, like a molting trophy. Hodge sprawled on the windowsill, paws extended, owning the light. Agatha lit a cigarette and watched the smoke drift, thin as vanished perfume. Some people kill for beauty, she said aloud. The rest of us settle for moisturizer. Hodge yawned, unimpressed with philosophy. A gentle knock sounded. Mrs. Bloxby slipped in, bearing warm scones wrapped in a tea towel. I thought you might like these. You've looked rather thoughtful. I'm always thoughtful, said Agatha. It just doesn't show through the mascara. Mrs. Bloxby smiled, her calm gaze taking in the ashtray. The tired set of Agatha's shoulders. You did a brave thing, you know, risking yourself like that. Oh, that was nothing, said Agatha quickly. I just hate being wrong. Sometimes, said Mrs. Bloxby, setting down the scones, the reasons don't matter as much as the outcome. They had tea. Gossip wandered over minor sins, garden mildew, and the vicar's hopeless attempt at dieting. When Mrs. Bloxby rose to leave, she touched Agatha's arm. Try to rest, she said. You don't need a mystery to be significant. After she'd gone, the cottage felt both cosy and too quiet. Agatha stood a moment in the centre of the room, surrounded by familiar clutter and the faint trace of roses from Bill's gift. "Don't need a mystery," she echoed. "Maybe not, but I'd rather have one than an empty diary." Outside, somewhere in Carsely, a phone rang, a dog barked, and a neighbour shouted about bins. Ordinary life, continuing shamelessly. Agatha crossed to the window. Noon light flashed again on the empty bottle. This time she picked it up, weighed it in her hand, then dropped it firmly into the bin. Hodge stretched, jumped to her chair, and settled as if declaring a truce. Agatha lit another cigarette, drawing in smoke with something like contentment. "All right," she told the cat in the quiet house. "You win. No more deadly perfumes. Next time it'll probably be poisoned jam." And despite herself, she felt the faint anticipatory prickle that meant there would, inevitably, be a next time. She carried her ashtray to the sink and paused, listening. In the distance, the faint ring of the village church bell marked the hour. Closer, the telephone gave one brief, uncertain trill, then fell silent. Agatha hesitated, allowing herself a crooked smile. "See, Hodge, peace never lasts." The cat opened one amber eye, then closed it again, unimpressed with prophecy. Agatha went to answer the phone anyway. It might only be Roy, or a missed dial from Mercester. Or, she thought with weary satisfaction, the beginning of the next damned thing, in Carsely, inevitably.